So let's move on to criticism. Now, criticism, this is where a lot of bogey questions can turn up, and sometimes unfair questions. So watch these. What I recommend you do is, when you go in and you're sitting in front of your comprehension, in front of your document question, get your comprehension done quickly, efficiently. I would always advise to have a quick look over the comprehension afterwards. The good news about this, though, you can rush the comprehension, because guess what? When you're doing all of comparison and all the criticism, you will have time to review the information you've used in part one, and it will pop up in your head if you've made a mistake, because you'll be looking at the documents again and again, and it will become apparent to you that if you have made a mistake in comprehension, it should become quite apparent when you're using the documents again and again throughout the comparison and criticism part. Okay? Can you all hear me? Yes? Okay. Now, this is a loaded question, and I was delighted when I saw this, because it really strikes at the heart of the whole civil rights movement. The term Negro, now thought to be offensive, occurs in both documents. Was its use in these documents offensive? No, that's an explicit question. Explain your answer referring to both documents. Now, that requires an opener, as I call it. So I have to put into context what I know. So the stated term Negro, albeit an offensive term, is used in both documents in a neutral and observational manner only. So having read the documents already and had a quick scan at them again, I can make that opening statement, because the question is, was its use in these documents offensive? So I've made a decision. I said, no, it's not, because number one, the document A is written by Martin Luther King, who was African-American. He's clearly not using it in an offensive manner. And then the only question is the journalist in document B. But having read that quickly twice and looked at his kind of almost, his partially hidden admiration for this group, and his final line, we'll come to it in a minute, his final line is what proves he's objective. So I've come to the conclusion that it's just used in a neutral and observational manner only. So it is an offensive term. It's outdated. Now, I've added a little piece just to show the examiner I know what I'm talking about. Albeit mean, can you show the docs as well? Oh, sorry. Can you see? Yeah. Is that better? Now, albeit means even though at the same time. Okay? Even though at the same time. It's just a very fluent way of saying even though, notwithstanding, at the same time, without using all those words. It literally means if you split across albeit, if you split it open, you can find three words. Albeit, all, be it. So, you could add so to make more sense of it, but when you're using it as one word, do not add so. Just say albeit whatever. Okay? Now, in document A, I need to prove that the use of the term Negro here is not meant in an offensive manner. So, in document A, Martin Luther King himself, by the way, we need to, I think I've done that already. If you're looking at long, and I put it here anyway, once you have done that anywhere in the document question, MLK, then that's all you have to use from then on to shorten the time. In document A, MLK himself uses the term Negro when he says Negro passengers. I've quoted that, that's a quote, twice, once in the second paragraph and once in the third. It's important if you're going to use the same quote, if it occurs twice in a document, to identify exactly where you got it from. That way then the examiner is happy that you have actually read it and you know where you're taking it from, and therefore the examiner has to give you marks for that. Okay? Now, he says Negro passengers twice, once in the second paragraph and once in the third. Considering that Martin Luther King was a central proponent for the establishment of integration and equality in all areas of society, and being an African American himself, okay, we're going into context here, it goes without question that his use of the term, though outdated, was not meant in an offensive manner. So there's an absence of any qualifying information here that shows offense. Martin Luther King was one of the organizers. This is a place where it is relevant and it is absolutely fair for you to respond in an almost kind of outraged manner. How the hell could it be offensive when the man was African American himself? And, you know, if he's using the term, he's using it in the light of the times it's in. And that's why I put this piece here. This could be important to you in your exam. Context is critical to critiquing historical documents, particularly primary source documents. It's context. And the context here is Martin Luther King is fighting for African American rights. If he's referring to Negroes as Negroes, he's not doing it in an offensive manner. Now, we could get into all sorts of conversations outside of this and say, is it acceptable now? I don't think it is. It just isn't. But in the context of the question, which we should stay inside, it's clearly not meant in an offensive manner. Now, document B, however, provides a bigger opportunity for trouble. Okay, so document B, the reporter Joe Asbel, always identify the subject, if you can, twice refers to African Americans as Negroes. However, again, his use, oh, sorry, that shouldn't be there. His use of this term implies no offense, as he refers to them in the first paragraph as Negroes by the dozen forming a file. Now, that phrase does, when I looked at it first 11 years ago outside the exam hall, when I saw that first that evening after the thing, that caught my eye, because that had connotations of something less than nice. I didn't like the sound of it. And I had to read the question again. But once I read it, once I had read the source again and the fullness of the source, it became clear that the implied meaning here was the strength of numbers of Black people in attending this protest meeting, to emphasize the reach and popularity of the protests. You could say it's ambiguous. Yes, Silifat, absolutely. You can argue it's ambiguous. And to a certain degree, it kind of is. Now, my answer is putting things in context. And all I find in this source is that, you know, the journalist has to remain objective and clearly does his job extremely well. He stays objective. But there's a little hint at the end of huge admiration, and almost it definitely feels that. And like, here's the problem though, you know, if you look at the Montgomery Advertiser reporting from Wall Street, Montgomery, later the same day. So this is a citizen of Montgomery, Alabama. Now, we could stop and waste the whole exam thinking philosophically about the context in which Joe Asbel, a native of Montgomery, a white man, is reporting this. So there's a huge, you could argue and argue, but you don't have time. So the point is, there's nothing really implicitly or explicitly offensive here, because it was a term that was used a lot back then and not in any way necessarily used offensively. It's certainly outdated now. No, absolutely you wouldn't use it now. But it's not, there is no evidence that it's offensive here. He's using this phrase to emphasize the reach and popularity of the protest. Furthermore, in the last paragraph, it is apparent that the author has admiration and respect for the African American protest when he says, now you could say, oh, he's not objective, you know, he's taking a side slightly, but he's taking it in a way of evaluating something. And he says, it proved beyond a doubt that there was a discipline among Negroes that many whites had doubted. It was almost a military discipline combined with emotion. That should be a full stop. Now, for a white man to write that at that time, Look at the way he removes himself objectively. It proved beyond a doubt that there was a discipline among Negroes that many whites had doubted. So we have the African Americans in one group have been doubted, and in the other group we have the white people that doubted them. Where does Joe sit? Joe has removed himself and has become the omniscient observer, which is what all great journalists should do and do when they're doing their job properly. He's looking at the broad spectrum of people almost as if he is not one of them. And he is objectively qualifying, quantifying the relative impact of and success of this protest in the larger context of the entire population. So he's clearly remaining extremely objective and stepping back, but also putting it into the context that many white people had never believed they'd have so much support and so much success from the very first day. And we know this by the second part. It was almost a military discipline combined with emotion. So emotion good, discipline good. So everything he is saying is he's evaluating, he's admiring, and he is definitely not using, there's no evidence in this document that it's meant in an offensive manner. Okay, now let's look at part B. You'll notice, again, trying to use quotations, probably better up here, of integrating them into your own statement and listing them. Now, which document, A or B, is the more objective source? Now, this is good fun, because this is the heart of what the criticism section is all about. Okay, so which document, A or B, is the more objective? So now I have to take a position. If you get this question in your exam, so you know your documents well by now, having gone through the first two parts. So you start with a general statement. Both document A and document B contain relevant and accurate information relating to the protest meeting. That's not what the question asked, though. But I'm putting it there as a qualifying pre-statement. They definitely, the question is asking which is more objective. And one of the qualities of objective sources is that they have information. They contain information. So I start with that. Both document A and document B contain relevant and accurate information relating to the protest meeting. So that's a good start, but we need to answer the question quickly. Objectivity is founded on the principle of only using verifiable facts and observations devoid of emotion, opinion, and subjectivity. You may want to use that in your own leaving cert if they're asking about objectivity. So you can only use facts that you can prove, observations that can be supported, and there can't be an emotional side to it or an opinion, I think, or I feel. No, you'll notice Asbel doesn't really use that at all, and it's not subjective. So I'm also showing the examiner I can define objectivity, which, by the way, you should prepare for. It can be very handy for this part of the document question. So finally, once I've said that both documents contain relevant and accurate information, I then defined objectivity. That has to be a response to the question. I've shown my knowledge of the term objective. And in this regard, I feel that document B is more objective. Non-biased. Objective is non-biased, but it's not just non-biased. It's based purely on information, verifiable information that cannot be changed or altered due to a person's perspective. You know, if someone hates trees and another person loves trees and they both go to the forest, there's one thing they can agree on. There's loads of bloody trees, okay? Whether they hate trees or love trees. That's objectivity. You don't have to define it. No, you do not. Thank you, Jamie. You definitely don't have to define it. I'm just saying it'd be clever. And you might say, oh, that's a waste of time. Yes and no. Yes and no. You know, you're not going to have many questions in the whole document question that provide a specific term. It's clever enough to write down a clear definition of it. It may also help you in formulating the answer more precisely. So the answer is here. In this regard, I feel that document B is more objective. Firstly, it is written by an outside source, a reporter, Joe Asbell. So he's not a white protester. He's not a white supporter of African American rights. He is a reporter. You could say, oh, hang on, he's from Montgomery. Yes, but when we look at what he writes, we find something quite different. Secondly, the author of document A, Martin Luther King, was involved in this protest and therefore is subjectively compromised. Sorry, I made it. So Martin Luther King is, by definition, because he's involved, is subjectively compromised to an extent. Now, in fairness, it doesn't show in his document, but we have to take it as fact that if he's involved, he is not going to be as objective as the most objective non-involved person. Also, in document A, Martin Luther King uses subjective expressions such as joyfully, eagerly, and that a miracle had taken place. This is important. This is the only criticism we can find of the objectivity of Martin Luther King's document. And in fairness, if you're reading it, no matter how much you support Martin Luther King, and obviously you do, but once you use those words, joyfully, eagerly, miracle, you can no longer claim it's objective, because it's clearly showing an emotional appeal to one side or outcome of the event. So that's a way you can immediately identify this is not objective. It's almost objective, and it's understandably slightly subjective while being mostly objective. But the second document, in contrast, is definitely more objective. So the joyfully, the eagerly, and a miracle had taken place. This implies that the author was not entirely objective in relation to the protest or its success. Now, in contrast to this, document B is written by a journalist who conveys many items of objective information. Here we go now with the firstly, secondly. Firstly, he states that there were Negroes by the dozens forming a file. So there's the phrase I already used. Of course you can reuse it if it fits and answers the question that is being asked. Clearly offering information as to the relative size of the protest. In other words, not giving us an exact number, but it is giving us a relative understanding of the size of it. Secondly, here we go. He refers to the time as being 6:45. Any piece of information that locates it in time, place, or gives us very precise information. He didn't say late in the evening. He said 6:45. Again, it's a sign that this guy is a professional. You know, he's trying to pin everything down precisely as much as he can. Additionally, another point, he describes the nature of the atmosphere as being stony silent. Now, something that is stony silent, is that objective? Well, there's an element of evaluation there. Well, there's silence. And stony silence is really just emphasizing how unusually quiet such a large crowd of people are. It adds to the effect and information without in any way being subjective. He then goes on to describe the nature of the protest meeting inside, singing followed by a prayer by the minister. He's giving us more information how the protest meeting went. First it was singing, and then there was a prayer by the minister. Most objectively of all, though, was his objective observation. Notice how many times I'm using objective here. Was his objective observation that it proved beyond a doubt that there was a discipline among Negroes that many whites had doubted. So again, referring back to that thing I said in the other question, objective literally means to be fair, accurate, unbiased, referring only to concrete facts, not opinions, not what you think or felt. You must remove thinking and feeling. And it's only what your eyes see, your ears hear, your skin feels, based on your direct senses. It can't be any formulation of your own mind. It can't be a metaphor or simile. It has to be just a clear statement. Okay, like it was 6:45. So it proved beyond a doubt that there was a discipline among Negroes that many whites had doubted. The reason I included that about objectivity is that he's looking at society in general. And by including whites and now the African Americans, in contrast to what whites thought, now he's talking about everyone. He's almost omniscient observer. This clearly shows that he was referring objectively to both the general opinions of white Americans and African Americans alike. And that's where I work in my word objective again. And like, is he a white American? Yes, he is. But he's referring to them as a large body of people with certain predominant prejudices and ideas. And he's probably including himself implicitly in it. But he's being objective in that he's identifying how this meeting had compromised or undermined that subjective feeling of white Americans. Okay? The key to everything, really, is listing. Firstly, secondly, additionally, and most objectively of all. Whenever you've got a number of pieces of information, don't try to throw them all into one rambling paragraph. You have to be like a machine. Firstly, secondly, thirdly, finally, furthermore, additionally. Every time you do that, the examiner has to respond with marks. Okay? Question 2 and 3. Do you have to? Right, Tara has a question here. When answering question 2 and 3, do you have to evenly divide your points between document A and B, or can you lean more towards one document? Very good question, Tara, and we had it earlier. Whatever the documents decide, like for example, I just go back up here. I see your question on, I'll come back to it in a second. When we go back up here to comparison, remember this, 2A. There's more in document B than there is in document A. And if that is the nature of the documents, then you go with it. You know, if there's more evidence in one document than another in relation to one specific question, do not worry about that. Just make sure you've scoured both documents and you found the information that is relative to the question. Okay, they do not have to be even. If there is no more information there and nothing else is to be said, like for example, I go back to the marking scheme just to finally and fully answer your question. Look at this. Can you see this? This is the marking scheme. And document A just gets that. But look at document B, gets all that. Because document B actually contains a lot more. Okay, so there's no requirement to have exactly 5 lines each. You know, it's not primary school we're in, or even junior cert. It's whatever is there and whatever is relative to the question. Okay, try to fit your quotes from the sources, from the documents, into your own expressions. List your points and don't be afraid of listing them one sentence at a time. Okay, if a question, right, to what extent does document B contain, do I only focus? Oh yeah, oh sorry. No, Silifat, I'll answer your question. If Silifat is asking, if a question states, for example, to what extent does document B contain, so on and so forth, do I only focus on document B? Right. The only answer to that is yes. Now look at this. These 2 criticism questions were unusual because this one said which document A or B, but in fairness, you have to you're supposed to compare them some way, but you're critiquing them. Now, if the question says, is document B an objective source? Should you refer to A at all? Not even for a second. In fact, if you refer to both documents where the question explicitly said refer to only one document in criticism, then you will actually lose marks. So the explicit statement of the question must be followed. This is criticism, but they did ask which document A or B. So we have to deal with both. And we have to quote from both, and we have to explain our choice and be clear at the end. This clearly shows that he was referring objectively. And I said here, in this regard, I feel that document B is more objective. Okay? But whatever explicit wording is in the question, you follow it. Now, Owen, I haven't forgot your question. Should your essays be objective or should you always include your opinion? Is that the general essays you mean, Owen, or in the document question? Generalness says, wherever possible, they have to remain very objective. Yeah, you should keep personal opinion out of everything. You spend on each part question about half page. Sorry, folks, just a minute. In 15 minutes. Go down.
No, I want to stay.
You can't. Just a moment, folks. Sorry.
Don't
I'll
eat
be
this.
alright.
Don't eat this.
Sorry about that, folks. Sorry, I just had an intruder. A small.
Bye,
Okay, bye-bye. Right. Now, contextualization. Now, this is the part that causes huge amount of trouble. Yes, you are allowed to abbreviate names. Once you state, and I did it somewhere up here earlier on, Martin Luther King, and straight after in brackets, MLK. Once you hear it, you are allowed to abbreviate. Yeah. How much would you recommend to write for that? That's a good question, Neil. Neil has just asked the question here. How much would you recommend to write for the contextualization answer? A question. Now, the answer is, how long is a piece of string? As long as it needs to be. I don't know if you've ever heard that one, but look at my answer. And I shot it out deliberately very quickly, based on my knowledge, obviously. Now, it's not a question of length. If we're talking about length, we should be talking 1 to 1.5 pages. Okay, so we put that there as a nominal. Yeah, I did actually. Well spotted, Neve. Well done. It's one of my favorite little sayings. How long is a piece of string? As long as it needs to be. So 1 to 1.5 pages. No more. Absolutely no more. If you're doing any more than that, you are shooting yourself in both feet. Okay? To study for history. The best way to study for history is, first and foremost, to organize all your information on each topic onto one sheet of paper. Now, I mean that. Note-taking is something I'll be, and building your own notes, which you have plenty of time to do now, actually, and it's something I'll come back to next week, is there is an old saying, like a third level, that if you're an expert on something, and if your notes are concise enough, and if they're absolutely perfect enough on one topic, and if they've gotten rid of all the superfluous expression and all the packaging and everything, just the core facts with a little bit of, extenuating expressions that connect things together, you should be able to reduce it to one A4 page. Now there's, no, I'm not talking about the 2.5 pages for what, Neil? The contextualization? No, not at all. Not at all. Sorry, no. Number one, Neil, and I'll tell you this, you don't have time. That would be impossible. Think about it this way. Yeah, up to 2, I wouldn't even go that far. You see, the examiner's not interested in volume. They're interested only in quality, absolute quality. Now, the first key component of quality here is we're going to look at the question. How important was the Montgomery Bus Boycott to the American Civil Rights Movement? So we're not just talking about the bus boycott, that should be a capital B, but we're talking about its impact and its influence on the broader American civil rights. But while we're writing our answer to this, we have to show the examiner we know what we're talking about. So explaining key individuals, key concepts as we go, that's the stuff that gets us marks. Now I'm going to shoot past it here and look at, this is the SEC, State Exams Commission, SEC definitions. Okay. A paragraph or paragraph equivalent may be one of the following. It can be a relevant introduction, giving the background situation or defining the terms and explaining their approach. It can be an episode, a phase, or a stage in a sequence of events. It can also be an aspect of a topic or issue with supporting factual references. It can be a point in an argument or discussion with supporting factual references. It can be an explanation of a concept or term with supporting factual references. It can be a number of significant relevant statements of fact, explanation or comment, which, although not connected or related, can be taken together and assessed as a paragraph equivalent. So my recommendation is 1.5 pages, but what that means is that you have got to be extremely responsive. So as we go along here, I'm going to highlight how important was the Montgomery Bus Boycott to the American civil rights movement. So let's go. The Montgomery Bus Boycott was crucially important to the American civil rights movement overall. In fact, it was the watershed moment in a process of legally deconstructing segregation. The Montgomery Bus Boycott took place in Montgomery, Alabama between 5th of December of 55 and 20th of December 56. It was organized in such a way as to severely undermine the profits of the bus companies while they continued with a policy of segregation on their buses. Now, you might not say, well, there's not a lot in that, but it tells us where and when it happened. It tells us why it happened. It also makes a statement that the bus boycott was essentially or crucially important to the success of the American civil rights movement overall. And then it identifies what type of strategy they had. So as an opening paragraph, it's short, but it's concise. And if we look at it, look up here. Your cumulative mark is 24. Now, each paragraph out of 12, it's going to be, sorry, I should have included this already. It's question mark out of 12. So each paragraph is going to be worth 0 out of 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Nobody ever got a 12 out of 12 paragraph. The best you could be looking at is 7, possibly 8 for a brilliant one. And what makes a brilliant paragraph, particularly in the contextualization, is that it is highly accurate, highly responsive, and repeatedly responsive. So what we're trying to do is build paragraphs that answer the question explicitly, not just once, but a number of times. Okay? So, how important was the Montgomery Bus Boycott to the American Civil Rights Movement? Paragraph 2. The bus boycott began after Rosa Parks, a seamstress and a member of the NAACP, show that you know what it is, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. You'll notice I've spelled that wrong. This is American English. It's a proper noun. We can't change the spelling of that word. Don't. Was arrested on 1st of December for refusing to give up her seat to a white passenger. So we've got context, just like it says here. A number of significant relevant statements or an episode, phase, or stage in a sequence of events. So if you're going to be putting factual information, sequence it. While Martin Luther King, MLK, as chairman of the Montgomery Improvement Association, MIA, okay, I meant was the chairman, and that's just a statement of factual information. The Women's Political Council, WPC, led by Joanne Robinson, was also drawn by into this boycott, and I forgot to highlight, sorry, NAACP, and yeah, we're going to put MLK, sorry, we're going to highlight the names, sorry, there, was also drawn into this boycott with their investigation. Oh, and I forgot, poor Rosa, sorry. Was also drawn into this boycott with their organization distributing leaflets calling for a boycott of Montgomery's buses in protest at Parks' arrest and fine. The coming together of these different groups, all working together to one specific goal in one place, allowed the American Civil Rights Movement to gather strength and cohesion. So there's my statement in response. There, it was the watershed. There we go. There's another one. I'm answering the question. The Montgomery bus boycott was was also instrumental to the American Civil Rights Movement. See how I'm responding to the question again? As it brought MLK to national and international prominence. Why is that so important? Martin Luther King's policy of nonviolent and peaceful resistance would garner huge support from the American Civil Rights Movement throughout the USA and internationally. What was the question again? How important was the boycott to the American Civil Rights Movement? Over 100 reporters were in Montgomery for the duration of the bus boycott. As you can see, we have a lot of direct responses to the question. We were also including a lot of key personalities, key concepts, and key organizations. The Montgomery Bus Boycott was instrumental to the American Civil Rights Movement as it was successful in legally challenging segregation in the US Supreme Court. Now, I directly alluded to that up here in the introduction, and now I'm going into it in depth. And this is where you need to know the background. The Supreme Court found in 1956 that segregation upheld since the ruling on separate but equal of 1896 was in fact in contradiction with the 14th Amendment of the US Constitution. This meant that the Jim Crow, and we'll highlight them as well, the Jim Crow states in the south of the USA, whether by custom or regulation, could no longer legally allow segregation on buses. What is crucial in this is that the implication for all other public spaces was immediate and obvious. Segregation was not permissible for any reason under law. And that is why the Montgomery Bus Boycott was important to the Civil Rights Movement. You'll notice we're answering the question all the time. The success of the Montgomery Boycott became a symbol and a practical strategy for the American Civil Rights Movement later on. Refer to the question, refer to the question. The membership of the NAACP flourished and integration of schools and universities became inevitable, even with the opposing protest, even with the opposition, of protesting white groups. Indeed, the impact of, and this is important, don't ever forget this, the impact of film and photography garnered, this is a really important point, the presence of the media. And this is why Vietnam War protests were so successful, and the American government never made the same mistake ever again. During the Vietnam War, the American government allowed the American press to just go over to Vietnam, take pictures of whatever they like, video what they like, report what they like. Since Vietnam, they do not allow the American press. There is no free press when it comes to American foreign policy. Every person that is involved anywhere near or reporting on American military is called an embedded journalist. Otherwise, they are not allowed in. And therefore, all their reports have to be signed off by a general. And they even have a department in the US Army, which is the media general. And he signs off on all the different journalists' reports. So there's no free press there, because the blowback they got from a free press monitoring the war in Vietnam was so huge that he propelled the anti-war protests in America. The impact of film and photography garnered the broader American Civil Rights Movement huge sympathy and support across the USA, as images of stoic African Americans attended, that should be attendees, attending integrated universities for the first time in the face of vicious and racist attacks. Stoic means to be calm. And when someone, like, there's some fantastic pictures of it, I'll be doing next week when I'm going through this topic, the actual content of the topic, where there was an African-American girl walking into a desegregated university, and they were spitting at her, they were throwing things at her, and she was just walking calmly with her head held high. She wasn't saying anything. She was just walking in this very stoic manner. She wasn't stopping, and she wasn't allowing them to prevent her, but she wasn't even recognizing their existence. It was almost like they were not shouting. It was like they were not there. So Martin Luther King and the Montgomery Bus Boycott had shown that peaceful and stoic determination reaped enormous benefits in terms of support and achieving targets. The bus boycott was instrumental in paving the way for further improvements in the civil rights of African Americans. Again, answering the question directly. The effect of the boycott and its widespread appeal and support led to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, both of which led to the large-scale enfranchisement of African Americans in the USA. In other words, it led to them being treated with the same rights and privileges as, the same rights as white Americans. Okay? Now,